Thank you very much, Volker, for that lovely introduction, and working with you and the team here of all of the different projects has been just a pleasure. The entire experience from beginning to end has been informative, challenging, enlightening, and very happy to be here. So good morning, everyone. Volker, in his inimitable way of doing things so well, gave me this title to talk about housing first Europe, an external perspective. And you know, I will accept being an outsider. It comes with the territory of living in the States for so long, but there's a bit of an irony because I was actually born in southern Greece in a small rural village, and in some ways, as I visit, you know, I have lots of family back there, and as I visit every summer with my family now, and seeing the transformation of that Greek village from being a Greek village to being a European village, and the Bulgarian families and Romanian families that are now populating, and the issues even within the village. Not everyone is living in the family home, and there are migrant workers. In a little microcosm of a tiny southern village of about 500 people, some of these huge social issues that we talk about are actually playing out. So I do have an external perspective because some of the issues that are talked about and what we've been hearing in the last couple of days are certainly not American, and there are some core value issues around social services and how we do them, and that I think I'll try and point out. It's been, you know, this project, at Volker's summary yesterday was just so clear and precise and illuminating how a group of projects that really didn't have a lot of technical assistance in terms of how to do a model and took on this enormous challenge, did so remarkably well. I mean, really, when you think about the housing retention rates we heard yesterday in 4 of the 5 projects, there is a lot to celebrate in terms of implementation, and it's just in the course of time during the project tenure, there have been many other projects that have also started around Europe. So the whole discussion about dissemination and are the slides going by themselves, or okay? That's maybe. Are you controlling the slides? Sorry, I couldn't resist that. The dissemination has been spectacularly fast, or at least really seems fast in Europe. But I just wanted to put it also in perspective, because one of the things that we do, the assertive community treatment teams, is a mental health intervention that has a rather similar history. And I just, you know, is this thing a unique phenomenon, or is this thing part of how mental, you know, interventions that include mental health and housing go? Assertive community treatment had an initial starting point in a place called Madison, Wisconsin in 1973. And it was done as a randomized controlled trial, getting people out of the hospital to try and live in the community for as long as possible. It was a really well done study. They had fantastic results in terms of reducing hospitalization and helping people stay with their families. They had even indicators for if this was a community burden or not, which they found it wasn't, but generally very, very, very good results. And they published the results, and nothing happened for 10 years. And when Leonard Stein tells this story. When he'd go around and do presentations about why ACT was so good and effective, people would say, that's nice, you know, that's really, it sounds good, but you can do that in Madison, Wisconsin. You can't do that in Detroit, you know, because people are different, you know, we have different values, systems here. And you can't do that in Ohio, and you can't do that in Pennsylvania. And so it went until someone else in Michigan replicated the study, replicated the intervention, the results were the same, and then one other person, and then it went literally from, no, you can't do that here, to how do we get an ACT team in our community? And, you know, ACT today has, you know, spread all over the world. So on this particular intervention is sort of on a similar time frame, 92, it's 22 years later. And it's, you know, the dissemination has taken a trajectory similar to that. So is it an unusual phenomenon that we're seeing, or is it just, you know, the way things are going? And Volker's point in terms of, do we emphasize the uniqueness of this, or how it's also consistent with so many other interventions from a value perspective, is something that strategically and maybe understanding why the dissemination is going so well, or perhaps to position it in a context that it's very useful to do, and many other kinds of services are moving in this direction, only supports and enhances the existing research, because it frames it into a larger body of evidence that says, you know, this is a good way to go when you go individualized and when you go consumer driven. I'm going to spend just a minute about, you know, we've heard about the dimensions of the program and you know, the sort of the core elements, and I think that I'll tell you how we go about looking at how these elements evolved, because it might be useful just in terms of your own thinking about how to examine the program that you're operating as a system as a way of sort of doing looking under the hood and making sure that the program you're running is sort of consistent with what it is that would get you the best results. There's really no reason to do fidelity except to assure that the program that you're operating will get you the results that you need. We didn't have an opportunity to do that kind of testing in the projects we've heard about here. We have very good narratives and information from interviewing the program operations people, but you would have to do a bit more of a thorough search to kind of weigh in on, you know, is the program close to fidelity or not? What about them? Oh, they're moving on their own. No, I did not. Thank you, Judith. So, you know, with PowerPoint, it'd be useful to have one of those Google glasses with the mirror, you know, like. So here's one way of thinking about fidelity. There's you know, it's only 8 tenets that we've heard about, right? The choice, separation, and so on. And those principles, when you have like that manual, an operation manual, translate to about 50 or 100 operational practices that drive the program on the mental health services side, and then on the housing side. And then, of course, those procedures play out differently for every single person that you're serving, so that even though you are offering someone housing and you're going through the checklist of their preferences for where they want to live and how and all of that, each conversation is in some ways unique because the answers at the consumer interaction level are different. So that if you want to see that the program is operating consistently on all 3 levels, you have to check all 3 domains. So, for example, you would interview a program You would interview program directors to check out the principles. You would also interview line staff, and you would interview consumers, because you would want the perspective of each of the stakeholders in these areas to see if there's some consistency, if they all map together under the same domain. The purpose of Fidelity also is to provide some technical assistance. In the visit, you would identify areas in which different or more or less kinds of things are needed, and that becomes part of the debrief. It also gives you a score that, from the research perspective, you have a high or a low score on Fidelity. You know, the scale goes like 1 to 50, let's say, and then you can correlate your fidelity with the program outcomes. They've done some very good work on this in the Mental Health Commission of Canada study at the At-Home Chez Soi, and are now looking at the outcomes for how quickly people get housed or stay housed as a function of being consistent with the housing dimensions on Fidelity, and how long people keep housing or move over and over again as a function of the way that the service pieces are done, and they're finding, you know, these things are happily related. Some of the dimensions of the program that haven't been discussed has to do with these kinds of things. We've mentioned them sort of in passing, but targeting the most vulnerable is another sort of dimension. If your program is set up that way, then you want to assure that the people that you're bringing in are the most. The projects here have done really well on targeting people that no one else was serving. This also ties into dissemination strategy in some way, that the competition, if you will, or the resistance of the system as usual to offer a place at the table for a new way of doing business is made easier if the new program is actually going to take on a group of people that no one else is serving, or that the other providers have tried and failed to serve over and over again. And that's a useful entry point. It also you know, serves the additional policy governance issue of typically this is the population that is a high user population of the acute care services, so the cost care argument can be made more strongly. There's a lot of discussion in the projects and you know, really also in the Canadian project about immigration status, but it's the immigration status issue is much more pronounced here in Europe in terms of people who are immigrants, legal, illegal, asylum seekers, refugees, and what do we do with that subgroup of people among the immigrants that may need services and may qualify. It's a policy issue, and I have to say I'm you know, just it's sort of an overwhelming kind of discussion, the kinds of issues that trying to help a homeless person with mental illness and addiction sort of leads to. I mean, for me, the focus of the program has always been about human capacity and to test the ability of people who have severe mental illness and co-occurring disorders to be able to manage in the community. That's really the, I would say, the single most important focus for me in terms of what this program is about. Can we actually achieve this? And then when it begins to push up against sort of policy, economic, and other issues, of course they have to be dealt with, but that becomes sort of a secondary issue for program sustainability and all of the management issues. But most of the focus on the tenets of the program and how they're delivered are all about, are we helping people? there are two dimensions about the help. One of the dimensions is what are we doing for people? Are we meeting their needs? If we're targeting people with complex needs, we need to be sure that we have the services in place once they're housed in order to help them keep the housing. And we've heard from Nicholas and others about different kinds of service models, the assertive community treatment team for people with complex needs, intensive case management, if people have more moderate needs, different staffing pattern altogether for homeless families, moms and kids. That's typically the scenario. So that but the important thing about service support is that it needs to match the level of need that the clients have. We did see in Budapest, sorry, in an interesting variant of an effort to get the people out of the forest. You know what was intriguing about that intervention was with €1,000, how well they did, that they were able to get 50% of the people housed with some very caring case managers doing extra work. It wasn't part of their job. And with the money to pay the first month's rent or security to get people into a room or a house, it speaks to when you move up to different sectors of serving the homeless population that are not necessarily in need of services, but it's really they're in need of money. They're in need of the fundamental boost to get off the street, get into housing, and have a few months of rent paid. There's some really good results out of this thing called rapid rehousing as a way to infuse cash and homelessness before people get to be chronic. It's not quite prevention, which would be another way of doing it, but the rapid rehousing for people especially who are circumstantially homeless, I would say, has proven very well, and we see that here with a very modest input, quite amazing. So the assertive community treatment and the intensive case management are words that are familiar in the mental health system. That's really why they're used, so we can have a dialogue about caseload ratios and what these services look like. In real life, they are much more of a continuum of kinds of services. You can have an ACT team that includes primary care physicians. The one in Copenhagen is extremely well staffed. Lots of support. The Glasgow team, peer-driven. So you can't really call it ACT or ICM, but these are sort of general constructs that we use to describe the sort of intensity and type of service. It doesn't capture the quality or the other kinds of very important issues that go on with that. And here in Holland, they have something called the FACT team, which is a new and interesting way of blending together ACT and ICM. So let's say a team is serving 100 people, 20 or 25 of them at any one time are getting full ACT services, and then another 40 may be getting case management plus psychiatric coverage, and the remainder are getting case management for now. But if people need more or less, they can be the services can be flexibly adapted. And the same team serves a variety of people. That seems to me practical and smart, because the services, like the housing and like the people themselves, and this is one of the difficulties in trying to define exactly what is this program, because they're all of it is a moving target. All of it is a moving target. Where the program starts and how it goes and where it ends up is something in motion all the time, that people are coming from the streets, adjusting to new life, new community. These services are different. As they get better, you need to have a vision of a program that adapts comfortably and allows for the kinds of changes that people are going to make. And if you don't have it flexibly organized, then you run the risk of sort of getting stuck in a way of doing services and housing because there's nowhere to go. The other piece of appear, and she is typically the greeter. You know how programs have an intake person. Well, she is our intake person, but she doesn't greet people with a form. You know, I mean, she will say things like this. You know, welcome, I'm so glad to see you. You're in the right place. You know, we're going to take very good care of you. You'll never be homeless again. Come and talk to me. What do you need? How can I help you? It's a very different way of doing intake, and this kind of exchange, the welcoming, the affirming, is an important dimension in what is associated with recovery. Recovery has been talked about a great deal, but it's a bit effusive, difficult to measure, and because it is in these kinds of exchanges that are experienced as directly as we're experiencing our own presence here in this room, and they are understood clearly by the person that you're serving, and I think that they actually affect in a very strong way how the person feels being part of your program. The unspoken communications, the attitudes, the respectfulness, the hope that's conveyed are program dimensions that are key to the success in quality of experience, quality of life, and other things, and even maybe I would argue to some extent around people feeling included. And yet they are difficult to measure. And so when you go to the checklist of, like, does the program have all of the dimensions, including a social justice dimension, you know, housing as a basic right, this particular evidence-based practice is the only one that has a social justice piece of a human rights piece to housing as part of it. And it's because it began as a program to address poverty and people who had been quite disenfranchised by diagnosis and bad histories and many obstacles to overcome. The two core things about this way, the how you do it, plays out in the delivery of choice-driven services. Because from the very beginning, asking the person what they want and being ready to accept the answer, whatever that is, you know, and whether it's a house, whether it's an apartment, whether it's a treatment program, but being constantly in the asking of what the client wants is the, I would say, essence of what drives the program's success for the consumer. Because unlike the traditional model where where the person succeeds by complying with rules, in this model the person succeeds by defining their own goals and being supported to move through them, so that the self-determination of the person is invited and encouraged at every step of the way. And you know, the reason I put this picture up there, because the Gestalt psychologists, you know, from the Berlin School, do a lot of work on perception, and we're very concerned about the place of value in a world of fact. And so I guess, you know, in terms of all of this conversation about what is program fidelity, you can check all of the different boxes and get them right and have 7 of those stars in the sky. but in order to sort of see it as the Big Dipper, something else has to happen that sort of organizes all of those seemingly random stars into a coherent program whole that embraces the kinds of values that we're talking about. And Sarah Johansson yesterday was talking about the Glasgow program, and there was a question about hiring. How do you have people that are willing to take risks and have the kinds of values and support people in the right way? It was a peer-driven program, and she said, you hire for values, and you hire for values because I think that you can train the skills, but you can't easily train personal values. So another part of the housing, I'm going to talk about the housing component for a minute, is we haven't talked enough about the economics. The day before, there was a person from a credit union that talked about micro-lending. Some of you were there. It was a very, very precise and wonderful presentation about the role of lending someone a little money to get them through, and how being poor was actually so much more expensive than having money. In the case of the homeless person having to eat out all the time, or buying a case of beer and having to drink the whole thing because there's no fridge to put it, there's no way you can buy a bag of groceries. And then when you move into housing, that life is made so much easier. And people do experience an economic gain, not only a psychological gain. We've talked about, R.D. Laing's ontological security that is met when someone is in a safe and secure place. And many of the people were housing have had long histories of trauma. And the level of anxiety and fear subdued by being able to control the front door, that they have a secure space that is totally theirs, is incredibly meaningful. But there is also this economic dimension that is very powerful incentive. And as good as we are in engaging people in terms of from a mental health perspective, I don't think it's lost to many who the offer of an apartment is made with the rent paid, that this is like a small lottery that they just won, and they have the opportunity to move into a house that's furnished, is a kind of a boost that they could never on their own put together with the meager government benefits that they have. So maybe they're just willing to tolerate us as visitors, as a trade-off for having that housing. And I think there's a lot to that, and then we have to earn our way into their trust and begin to help them over time. But I think one of the reasons that the intervention is so effective is that, and it's not talked about very much, is because of this huge economic boost that people get once the offer of housing is made. We've had some conversation about congregate housing, single-site housing, and housing first, scattered site, and they're very, very different models, really. The single site model, at least in Finland, you can't say no to 100 million euros from the national lottery when they wanted to fix up the shelter system and build congregate housing. There's a pragmatic reality to building lots of affordable housing right away that is just impossible to resist. And even when it's a difficult securing of money to build 100 units or 80 units of housing for people who are homeless, that kind of initiative to build housing, affordable housing, is a developer's initiative, is a public health initiative, is a advocacy for poor people having affordable housing initiative. It's a program initiative. The Housing First scattered site model, as it was developed, is a person-centered initiative, we didn't actually know we were going to be in the housing business. We could have been in any business that the person wanted as their choice. It just turned out that they wanted housing first, so that the orientation of these two kinds of program models are very, very different. And for me, there's no investment in one model or another, but I'm clear about the fact that they're not the same. But if the person I'm serving wants to go and live in a place that has other people, with the same kinds of needs, there's no problem with taking it. The choice is more important than the type of housing. But in the single-site model, there is no, it's not only that it's harm reduction housing, and so it looks like housing first in that regard if people are going in and they have a lease to the unit. But there's no, separation of housing and services, and the concentration of people with diagnosis in one place. In the States now, the Supreme Court has years ago agreed that people with psychiatric disabilities fit into the overall classification of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which has accessible everything for people with handicaps and disabilities, means that people live in housing of their choice, least restrictive settings, and have availability to social, cultural, educational, employment access the same as everyone else. So people are, by law now, state after state, are having to dismantle these large congregate places in order to allow people to have more flexible housing in the community. The other dimension of it that's a bit problematic from a recovery standpoint is that if you have a room in a single-site building and you can't have another tenant in there with you, so then it sort of puts also a ceiling on the kind of lifestyle you can have when you are living in one of those places. People talked about loneliness in moving from the streets to an apartment. I think that's a very important thing to be sensitive to, and I think it, in many ways, like the moving target that the program is, it changes over time. People get more comfortable, more familiar with their neighbors. When people report loneliness, I think it's an indication, as a motivation to want to expand their network. Initially, when people complained about loneliness, I took it literally and went and bought 4 houses with like 4 bedrooms and shared kitchen, living room, and I went back to the people in the apartment and I said, okay, you want to live with other, if you're lonely, we have a house, you could have like a bedroom in this house and live with 3 other people. And they said, no. I said I was lonely, I'm not crazy, why would I give up my apartment and go live with 4 other people? It's very difficult to live with 4 other people. So we had to find people who were homeless to, because that's the thing, any kind of housing you build will be full because the demand for housing is so much greater than the supply. But it's not the way to address loneliness. Loneliness is much more complicated, especially for people with a psychiatric disability. And this particular slide is just a reminder for me when I went back to my office. One of the clients, this woman who I talked to just in passing in the hallway, and we've had some great conversations about what it is to be ill. And she's taught me a lot. The first thing that she said to me years ago now was, isn't all illness a departure from a preferred state of being? And so I knew I was going to learn a lot from this person. So I'm back from a trip, and she comes, it was to Toronto, and she comes and she gives me a postcard of a Canadian landscape. I know you've been to Canada a lot and enjoying it. I wanted to give you this as a kind of as a present. We were chatting about it, and she has relatives. She's from Buffalo, which was nearby, and so on. And when I opened up the card, it was a birthday card that had been sent to her. And I said, I can't take this. It's your birthday card. Thanks for showing it to me. No, she says, I'm not a collector like you. And she points to my bookcase where I have like rocks and cards. So, and I went to offer her back actually a stone I had picked up at Mount Zion. She refused it. And we were laughing about our differences in hoarding behavior. And then, you know, she gave me a voicemail, and she says, you know, you talk about the programs, and you talk about survey, you talk about all of these different things, but or you talk about the card or not the card or the rock. Those things don't actually matter to me. I'm not really interested in holding on to cards or rocks or a particular thing. She says, what matters to me was the conversation we had, because that's where I live. I live in those kinds of exchanges. I live in what disappears. And it captured and reinforced for me the importance of the interactions we have with people. We've learned a great deal about the importance of peers. Several programs here have talked about that, and peers that spend time with people rather than provide services with people. The other thing I learned just here in the conversations during the workshops was, I think that in some way, you know, this program, because you're taking people at high risk, so to speak, and putting them into apartments, requires the practitioners and the agency to take much greater risk than they're usually comfortable with. And I think peers not only serve the role modeling purposes, but I think they help people to take greater risk in general, because they've been to the edge and haven't fallen off and are more comfortable with that. And I think they actually help us all to kind of be more able to embrace more risk. The findings here are actually very consistent with what we learned from the Canadian project in terms of seeing this intervention applied through so many different settings and different cities and different populations with different supports, that that it held up remarkably well. And I guess there was just one concluding slide that my colleague Anna Stefancic about fidelity anyway talks about, which is, you know, and it comes also in the context of using housing first. One of the Suzanne Fitzpatrick and Ruth Owen yesterday talked about using housing first as a program or as a policy, and maybe extending it too far. And then if you extend it too far as a policy, you lose the precision and outcomes that you have for the program, and sort of weighing the pros and cons of what it is, what is the most useful way to think about this. And happily they concluded that it can be both, and you just have to be very deliberate and clear about whether you're talking about a program model or you're talking about a policy perspective, and not to lose track of that. Because if you do, then housing first fidelity goes out. Thank you, Anna. This is the system redesign. You know, I think we have a very good way of describing the program and what it does. I think what we need to do is to figure out a way to get existing providers who are in the staircase model think about things in reverse, and then help them to move from being a shelter or a transitional housing provider to a permanent housing provider. We will not really move this in a large-scale way and use housing and service resources that currently exist, which is not much, but we could get much more efficient outcomes from the existing services if we redirected things in the direction of a permanent supportive housing, housing first. I think that would be a useful thing, and right now that particular roadmap needs to be developed. The other thing that we need to do is to figure out things that we haven't talked much about, which is prevention strategies. I mean, we've got a very good way of taking everyone off the streets, but we could be spending many years doing that if we don't figure out how to prevent people from falling into the streets to begin with. So with that, thank you very much.